Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode. I'm your host, Brandon Cobb, co founder of HBG Capital. And today I've got a very special guest. I've got Tilden Moschetti on the show. He is a highly regarded expert in real estate syndications. He's a syndication coach. He's general counsel to two huge private equity funds. He's an active syndicator himself, something we're going to talk about. That's very important when reaching out to any kind of attorney. I'm a very big proponent of them doing and actually being involved in the thing that they're advising on. He's been featured on NPR, NBC News, People Magazine, the National Law Journal, and the San Francisco Chronicle, and the Los Angeles Business Journal. We're going to have some fun today. Tilden, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks, Brandon. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on. We're going to jump into this whole world of raising capital, not just for real estate, but for businesses as well. And this
Great.
is a gray area. There's a lot of questions that are centered around this space. Why would I do a syndication? Why would I do like a fund? Why not just do like a joint venture? There's a lot of people that I see skating in the gray area here, raising money for real estate, for non-real estate stuff. And quite frankly, I think that they're breaking law. I do not think that they're doing the right way, but I'm not an attorney. You're an attorney. I'm excited to ask you these questions today to give
Totally.
people the proper blueprint to do this the right way and to avoid getting into the wrong kind of deal with somebody who's improperly raising capital, because that can set yourself up for some pretty big nightmares to deal with.
That's
But before
tough.
we jump
Yeah,
into all the good stuff, tell us your story.
absolutely. Well, it started really, I went to law school originally to be a developer. So I was looking around. I liked the idea of being a developer. The people in my area that were doing development, a lot of them were attorneys. And so I thought that made a lot of sense because, their law certainly underlies a lot of it. So why don't I go to law school? So I did that. Had a great, law school education, and then towards the end of that, I did some trial advocacy courses and kind of got my ship kind of diverged a little bit, where I decided to go be a litigator. So I was a litigator for 10 years, and I took mostly cases that centered around real estate and disputes about real estate. So whether it was valuation or something like that, I didn't do landlord tenant. I really wanted really to get into the fray. So that meant a lot of divorce, bankruptcy, partnership disputes, that sort of thing. It's my bread and butter. As anyone who's been in those kind of situations will know, litigation is extremely unhappy and extremely painful for everybody involved. And so I was pretty miserable for 10 years. And so I looked around and tried to figure out what to do. And I decided to do a little bit of some commercial brokerage and uh, had a partner on that side who showed me this deal. And he said, "Hey, take a look at this. This looks like a really great deal." And I said, "Sure." And I looked at it, and it was a really great deal. And he said, "Well, we should syndicate this." And I hadn't really the faintest idea what he was talking about. I mean, I kind of could figure it out, but
Yeah.
really know. And I said, "Sure, let's do it." And so ended up putting that deal together, having to kind of put all the pieces together for myself because there wasn't really a blueprint for how to do it.
What kind of deal was
Uh,
that? Just
it
curious.
was a single tenant medical office in Alabama. So,
Okay.
but it was new construction, and it was bought from the developer, and the developer just wanted to keep going and building more of these facilities. So we got it a little bit below market, had a lot of upside, and turned out to be a pretty good deal. Um, so put that deal together. That worked really well, and then put together another deal. And I'm still pretty miserable practicing law as a litigator, and so I thought, why am I doing this when I really like putting these syndications together? Why don't I change my practice and really start help putting deals together? So that was about 10 years ago, and I've been doing that ever since. So now it's I work with clients to help them with their own deals and make sure that the syndications are put together in a way that conforms with securities rules.
Mhm.
And then I do my own deals on top of that.
So for those that are green to this whole world of raising capital for any kind of deal, doesn't matter if it's real estate, maybe you want to go start a fund and buy a bunch of tech stocks, or you want to go start something that you know, start like a new business venture and you need to raise capital from
Yep,
investors. Walk us through what is a Regulation D offering? What are some of these
sure.
vehicles that people can use that allow them to raise money without having to go get like a broker's license or your Series 7 or some very sophisticated, complicated license to be able to raise money?
Yeah, well, let's start at the very top and talk about, well, what is a security? Because that's really where the whole process starts. So, a security is something where whenever somebody is trying to raise money, where essentially investors are going to be making money, and that making money is because of your work or on the work of some third person, it's a security. So a security either needs to be registered with the SEC. And by registered, we mean basically going public. So we mean 50 attorneys working on this thing, spending millions of dollars putting it together and getting it through the SEC to go public. Or there are some exemptions to the to registration.
Mhm,
One of those exemptions is Regulation D. The other two that we think about are Regulation CF, Regulation Crowdfunding, or Regulation A.
mhm.
Regulation D takes the vast majority of these offerings. It's the biggest, most widely used exemption. It's about 98, 97% of private offerings go under Regulation D.
Yeah.
Uh, it's very flexible. It lets you raise an unlimited amount of money from an unlimited number of accredited investors and a choice between either limiting it to just accredited investors, but you get to advertise, or you can bring in some non-accredited investors, but you can't advertise.
Makes a lot of sense. And so the biggest thing to know right there is the difference between what is a security and what does not qualify as a security. So just breaking
Yeah,
that down very, very simply for the audience, because I really want to make sure before we move on to the next stuff that they know what
sure.
that is. Like it just very simple advice, breaking it down. If you're speaking to a third grader, what's the difference between a security and a non-security?
Really, I think the most common sense way to look at it is what is the work of that investor? Are they just giving the money to the sponsor and they're taking a passive role? Or are they really actively engaged? So if they're very actively engaged, if they're part of the decision-making process about everything, and they're, part, really integral part of the deal, maybe they're doing all of the construction management or whatever it is, that's what we're talking about joint ventures. So that
Yep.
sounds a lot like a joint venture. Whenever it's somebody just, hey, here's $100,000 to get it going or whatever, and the sponsor, that person who put everything together, is making the decisions, that's a security. So, and it doesn't matter whether it's a loan in exchange for interest. It doesn't matter if it's like that or if it's, hey, I'm just going to make sure you get some participation from it. It's that passive role that makes it a security.
Okay. So when you've got somebody that's just giving you money, not doing anything else regarding the deal, then
Yep.
that's technically regarded as a security.
Yep. Exactly.
Okay. Easy enough. And so I know that there's some very popular vehicles, 506B, 506C is very, very popular for raising money for a lot of different deals. Maybe explain the difference between those two to the audience that doesn't know what those are.
Yeah, and I think the easiest place is to like which one you choose, because that kind of answers the difference between the two. So when a deal's being put together, one of the first questions that needs to be asked is, well, where's the money going to come from? Is it from people that I know, or is it
Mhm.
from people that I don't know? Because that's going to answer the question of whether I need to advertise this or not. If you need to advertise it, that is possible under Regulation D, under Rule 506C. Rule 506C lets you advertise. You can put a billboard on Main Street if you want. You can put it all over Facebook or LinkedIn, whatever it is. You can make it totally out there in the world, except you can't have any non-accredited investors. So every single investor has to be accredited, and they really, really should be verified by a third party that they are an accredited investor. So that's one mechanism. If I already know everybody in my network who's going to be investing, whether they're non-accredited or accredited or not, we're probably going to choose Rule 506B, because under 506B, we don't need to verify that anybody's an accredited investor. Also, if I want to have non-accredited investors, we're going to go down that road as well.
Yeah.
And so there we can have up to 35 non-accredited investors in any 90-day period. And we can still raise an unlimited amount of money and have an unlimited number of accredited investors still. They get to self-select and say, hey, I'm an accredited investor. And then that can go forward under 506B. We just can't advertise it.
Yep, makes a lot of sense. We've covered the basics now. One of the questions, or one of the areas in this particular area of law that I notice, and we've seen some struggles on, like, we've used quite a bit of different syndication attorneys, and one of the gaps that I see is people will, like, this type of education is not readily available, and it's very important because I mean the SEC takes this stuff very seriously. And in my experience, what I've seen is when working with a lot of these security attorneys, they're happy to do the paperwork and do the private placement memorandum, do the subscription agreements, do the blue sky filings, but where there's a lot, like, especially for somebody new that hasn't, like, done a lot of these, that's getting into it, there's a lot of education that needs to
Yeah.
happen. And I noticed that, especially for us when we were first getting started, we had a lot of questions. And I'm this very conservative, kind of by the book guy. Like, I grew up where, like, Catholic school teacher, didn't want to break any rules. I was scared to
Right.
break the rules. And so you throw in like SEC, and like you hear people going to jail for doing things, like, I was freaking out. And so I was asking these attorneys pretty regularly for, like, advice, like, hey, am I doing this right? Am I doing this? Is this compliant? And these were pretty big decisions that we were making, because a lot of our advertising, a lot of our social media content was centered around that. And they just didn't really want to advise. Like, they wanted to
Yeah.
do the paperwork, they wanted to get paid, but nobody seems to really want to do any of the advising work to make sure that their client is properly educated and feels comfortable doing it. Why is that such an issue in this space, and how do you mitigate that with your clients?
I think it's an issue because the vast majority of other securities attorneys haven't done their own deals. And so they don't really understand where you're coming from when you're asking those sort of things. So, the attorney mindset is a very different kind of, when I'm wearing my attorney hat, it's the lens I'm looking at things on is very different from, hey, how do I get this deal done? How do I make it happen? It's more, how do I make sure everything's compliant, and how do I make sure everything's good? And so my role is really more of a balancing act, because I have a lot of clients that are in your position, that were in your position, that don't have that experience of having put these deals together. And so how I mitigate it is really, let's our target is to have a successful offering. I mean, that's the goal of it, and that's all my clients' goals, and that's my goal. The more I
Yeah,
help my clients, the more they keep hiring me, so it works out great.
right.
So and that's the real lens I look at it through, is how can I get them to be successful? How can I get that offering over the finish line? A huge chunk of that is compliance and making sure that everything works. And then just being a team member, as a resource of, hey, let's talk about advertising. Let's talk about these things, about what's going to work ultimately. It's also a thought, when when things get tight for a sponsor or a syndicator, it's more normally that we haven't raised enough money, we haven't been successful at this. And so that's when a lot of times some people, hopefully not my clients, will cut corners. And that it's that cutting the corners that causes the problem with compliance, where the answer could be very simple. They just may, but other attorneys may not know what that answer is because they haven't sat across from an investor and tried to pitch a deal, right? So
Can
they
you give
haven't
us a
had that
story of that? Can you give us some like teeth around that? You said, maybe an example of a time like a client tried to cut a corner and it was a very simple solution. Like what comes to mind?
Yeah, I mean, normally it'll be something like, hey, we've raised let's say we're raising $5 million. We've raised 4 million. We need to do that other million, and I've got this guy who says that he can bring me $1 million worth of more money for my syndication, but I need to but he wants me to pay him a performance fee. So he wants to act as a finder, which generally is prohibited. There's a lot of details about it, but in general, it's not allowed.
So this investor
Um,
says, I got $1 million, but I want a little something extra based on how the deal performs.
Not the investor. I know 10 people who will invest, 100,000 each, but you got to
Ah,
give me a piece of the
it's the
action when
fund of
they,
funds model. You're bringing somebody in
yeah,
who wants to pull their network's capital
exactly.
together and lend in the deal. Yeah,
And
it's
so
very
how do we fit that piece in? A lot
Mhm.
of times there's an answer. So a lot of times there is a mechanism that we can do in order to do it. So I have clients right now that are doing that exact thing where they're bridging the gap. We just need to make sure that we're compliant with the rules in order to do it and not run afoul of acting as a dealer or acting as an unregistered security or whatever it is. So
yeah.
there are solutions to the problem, but there's a lot at stake at those point, and timelines get short, and so I think compliance can get slippery when people feel that crunch, because and if you don't have an attorney that's like, okay, here's our goal. We got it. We have to hit this target. How are we going to hit this target, but still comply with all the rules? And they don't feel that sense of urgency, then I don't feel like there's enough of a solution mindset in order to get that done. Because most of the time we can figure it out. Sometimes you can't. And sometimes there's going to be, you got to scrap the deal. I've had
Yeah.
deals where I've lost. And it's like, okay, we're not going to make that happen, get everyone their money back. It's gonna fall apart, where it's not gonna happen. And it's horrible. It's a terrible thing to go through. But sometimes occasionally that is the right answer rather than the cutting corners.
Yeah. So let's say that Brandon, me, I have a deal and I've
Yeah.
got people reaching out and they're like, Brandon, I love what you're doing. I really want to invest in your deal or be able to pull my friends and family together and raise capital for your deals. What would you advise me and this person to do and how to structure it that's in a compliant manner?
So we put it under Regulation D. It's kind of irrelevant whether it's 506B or C in this context, but it's under Regulation D. Then it's going to be for those investors who want to come in and want a little bit different a deal. Absolutely no problem. We can absolutely do that. We just need to make sure that whatever deal we make, whatever side deal that's happening, isn't going to hurt all the other investors who are there. So no matter what, we have to make sure that every investor is treated the way that they've been told that they're going to be treated, right? So if they've been promised they're going to get this portion of this pot of money of the returns, we need to make sure they're going to get that, or at least know, hey, the deal's changing. Your option on whether you want to stay in or not because of these factors, we have to change the deal. So if it's a material change, you still can do it, but everybody's got to know and kind of sign back on to it. So they're simple, but for those people who want to bring you other investors, it's not too much of a problem if they really are going to be part of branded syndication, right? They're going to be part of your sponsor. They're going to act as officers in your organization, and they're going to really add value more than just bringing money. They're going to take over investor management or under marketing, or they're going to be an active participant in you as the sponsor. If they just want to bring the money, it's probably not a good idea.
Yeah. Yeah.
Most of the time, my answer is going to say, just don't do it.
Yeah.
You're going to get caught and you're going to get in trouble.
So the solution that I see, the people that are navigating this is yes, you can do it, but if you're going to raise money and contribute it to somebody else's deal, there's got to be some active participation. You need to be on site helping underwrite that deal. I see a lot of people will post that on Facebook, them walking the
Yeah,
site. You need to be in charge of investor relations where you're managing and updating investors and giving those updates. There's got to be more involvement than just you raising money for the deal. Is that right?
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And I think that's where it falls apart is people think, well, we can just do this and pay them because they brought me the investor. And you can't. The rules are very strict about that, uh, and rightly so. I mean, they don't want to create. This is a private offering. We don't want to create a system where it's a somewhat public offering, right? Because
Yep.
that flies completely against with what the SEC is trying to do with it.
Makes sense. One thing that I have a question about that's very popular that I see is when it comes to flipping houses, for example,
Yeah.
you've got an investor who, that's not an investor. They're not going to contribute any money. They're the guy out there that has the business, the house flipping business,
Yep.
and they've got multiple options. They could go to a bank and they could get a loan for
Yep.
their rental property, or they could go to a hard money lender and they could go get the loan from a hard money lender and fix flip it, or they could go to their friends and family and get a private loan from
Mhm.
them. Is there any difference in those
Yeah.
three options? Because it seems to me like if you're going to friends and family, you need to be doing like a Reg D. A lot of people are doing a promissory note, a deed of trust, personal guarantee. They're securing the investor's interest to the property. They're going through, doing all the right things. The same stuff that they would with a bank or a hard money lender. But is there any nuances with using like a bank or hard money lender that don't apply to them raising money from like friends and family? Because I see this all the
Yeah.
time. It's very,
Oh, it
very
does. Oh, it happens.
popular.
Yeah. There's not a week that goes by where I don't talk to somebody, a potential client, who hasn't even or hasn't at least done this in the past, hasn't done some sort of security offering where they didn't file anything and make it happen. It happens a ton. And so the answer is yeah, it is a security. And ultimately, someone is going to get in trouble for it because it is a violation of the rules. You're not properly underneath the security regulations when you have those investors, when it's just friends and family. Well, it's my aunt and my uncle gave me a promissory note and I'm going to pay them a 6% return. It's still a security. And so it does need to properly be under that context. The bank and hard money lenders are separate. So the Supreme Court ruled, I don't know, a number of years ago that those are different kind of activities. That kind of note, that kind of existence falls outside of what the definition of a security is. So, but in our context, it is an investment, a contract that's being created, which means it's a security by its pure definition. It's an investment that's being made, whether it's just doing it through a promissory note, which I set up deals that look exactly like that for, or it's some sort of equity in the deal. It doesn't really matter who it's for, who the investor is. It doesn't really matter how much money. If it's $1, it's still a security. If it's your mom, it's still a security. It's just not likely if it's your mom and it's $1 that it's ever going to be found out about, because these things rise to the attention of the SEC ultimately, or state regulators, when there's a lawsuit. I mean, that's when it comes about.
Yeah. So what's different about a bank or hard money lender from
Oh, very simple. They're in the business
private?
of just lending money.
Okay.
That is their entire purpose, is to do that. And so the SEC, or the Supreme Court said, we recognize that it looks very similar, but their whole business is that lending money. So a hard money lender, absolutely, a bank is, that's their job, is doing these deals. Yeah, they're kind of investing in these things, but really their job is, this is all they do.
I got you. So there's a difference there. And so the thing is, if it's not their full-time job lending money, then it's most likely going to fall under the definition of a security.
Yeah, and I think if you were, hard money lenders are a little bit looser tied to it, and what they weren't specifically called out in the Supreme Court's opinion, but it's pretty implied, because of that. It's their job. It's the whole function of the operation, is to provide capital to, basically, in this case, flippers who are putting a bunch of deals together. They've got a ton of different people that they're lending money to. This isn't a one-off thing. And if it was a one-off thing, I think it probably would start looking a lot more like a security.
Yeah. What are some of the other mistakes that you see are most common with people who are just raising money in general?
Um, Well, there's certainly a problem with finders. That's very out there as a common thing, or people putting it into the context of, well, this is a JV, maybe we don't need one on this case. People running the risk of, well, we're probably not going to find out. The SEC probably isn't going to find out, is a big problem. I think there is a potential problem in the near future that we will see more and more of funds of funds. I'm very critical of the way most funds of funds are brought to me, in terms of whether or not it rises to the whether or not that function of the person, the sponsor of fund of funds, whether they are really acting as a dealer rather than as an investor. And along with that, we see a new rise of this kind of funds of funds model, where they're custom tailored funds that are being touted, that I think are absolutely going to get shut down. Where it's customizable, where we can have an investor in, and we're going to put them here, here, and here, and the investor gets to choose, and we get to take fees off of. I think that's absolutely acting as a broker dealer, and I would expect some major. I don't know this to be true. I don't have any insights on the SEC or state regulators, but I would highly suspect that they are going to be tracking down, be shutting that sort of operation down.
Okay, why is this? Let's talk about that. So the one year's
Sure,
on board, we're still raising deal by deal because it's just the cleanest way to do it right now. We'll do a fund,
sure,
we did a fund for a little bit for building single family houses. Right now, we're just doing individual syndications on a deal by deal basis,
sure.
and we'll probably end up doing another fund here in the future, just specifically for land. But
Mhm.
why is that not compliant? As somebody who sits on the other
Yeah,
side of the table, what is your opinion around that?
yeah. So I think it. I don't think it's. I would strongly disagree with a securities attorney that said that it was a proper structure. And I think the best analogy would be, think about the money manager. So whether it's somebody who works at Raymond James or something like that, and what you hire them for. So you go to a registered investment advisor or a securities broker, and you say, hey, I've got this pool of cash that I want to invest. And that person advises you on, well, I think a good mix of stock, it would be 60% stocks and 40% bonds.
I see.
And this is how we're going to allocate it, and how I'd recommend you do it. And then they show you all the options, and you're like, no, I really want more money in Apple. And they say, sure, no problem. So what does the RIA do? They get on the phone
Who's the
and they,
RIA? What's the
oh,
RIA?
sorry, that's a registered investment advisor. So it's somebody who carries a license. They're
Got it.
registered with FINRA to provide investment advice and to make this happen, to hold
Yep.
that set of accounts.
And there's a
They call
fiduciary
There's a
responsibility there.
fiduciary responsibility, absolutely. They call up if they're not a don't hold a Series 7. They call up their broker dealer and they say, my client would like to buy 100 shares of Apple as part of their portfolio. And that happens, right? So now the
Yeah.
100 shares gets held into there and it's put into their account and all is good. Well, now we've had two registrations, two different FINRA licenses in order to do that. One FINRA license in order to say, hey, I can hold this set of accounts with the person who's making these decisions. They're going to place money in these different securities, and that's how it's going to happen. And there's another license that's been going on, that Series 7 license, in order to place that order for that security. Both of them are truly licensed. What we're hearing on what this model is of this customizable account is saying, well, we don't need any licenses. We can just hold those accounts like the registered investment advisor, and we can place transactions in. And you, the sponsor, you get to keep that money that for that those sort of transactions. That sounds exactly to me like what a broker dealer or an investment advisor does,
Yeah. Very similar.
which I would expect would make a lot of investment advisors kind of angry and call the SEC and file a complaint. And I can't see a model where it doesn't equal that, where it's truly a fund of funds. To me, a fund of funds is okay is but once we start getting to this line of, well, we're choosing things and we're holding these securities for the benefit of our members, it's starting to look way too crossing the line and putting that, that it should be something that's licensed. The
Yeah.
whole job of the SEC, their entire purpose, and state regulators is to protect the public. So it's to protect the public from fraud and from bad things happening. Those licenses exist as a shield for the public to make sure that what happens when those transactions are for the best interest of the public and that people don't get hurt or taken advantage of wrongly. That isn't something that takes place in our world of private offerings. We don't
Yeah.
have that layer of protection. And the SEC says that's okay because there is this relationship that exists between the investor themselves and the security that they're going into. And I can pick up the phone today. Like if I was an investor in one of your securities, I could pick up the phone today. I could give you a call and I could say, Brandon, why did you make that decision? I'm not so sure I'm good about it. And you'd talk with me about
Yeah.
it. You don't get to do that when it gets a little bit more abstracted. And it's that relationship that you and I would have if I was an investor that would make it okay because I can talk to you. I can figure out what's going on. We can have that discussion. Once you start abstracting out more and more, you lose that touch. And it's starting to look like a way to get around this private offering to make it really kind of more of a public offering.
Makes a lot of sense. This has been a treasure trove of advice. Thank you so much for coming on the show. If people want to learn
Yeah.
more about you, Tilden, learn more about your services that you offer, where can they go?
Best place to go is either my website, moschettilaw.com, or I also have a bunch of videos on my YouTube channel. I think we have like 200 videos there. Walk through all sorts of different segments, including on a lot of these topics that can be hopefully helpful to people.
We'll make sure that that gets posted in the show notes. Thanks for coming on today.
Absolutely. I really appreciate the opportunity to meet your audience.
And hey, if you got value from this episode, if you're listening to this, show Tilden some love, show me some love, subscribe, like, and share this episode with your friends and family. We will see you guys next time.